first got started on the question of appreciative journalism when I was living in India for a year with my parents, when my dad was on a teaching exchange. And I remember spending hot afternoons practicing classical Indian dance and trying to learn how to balance a jug of water on my head as I saw the women in the neighborhood do. And I came to love that country in spite of the food that was unfamiliar to me and in spite of the difficulty I had learning Hindi. But every day when I walked outside, I'd be surrounded by swarms of beggars. And I couldn't understand why, in a country as ancient and beautiful as India, people my own age were going hungry. That sent me on a lifelong journey to get answers. Why hunger? And why poverty? And as someone who had the privilege to wake up every morning knowing that I would have enough to eat that day, I wanted to know what I could do. The mainstream media wasn't giving me much help. Everything I saw was saturated with images of the wealthy and powerful, or those who wished they were wealthy and powerful, or advertising telling us how to feel like we have more, or that would somehow make us happy. When poverty was addressed, it was addressed as in a very superficial charity mode with very little that got to the root causes. Communication theorist George Gerbner says that the people who control the stories of a culture control its behavior. In the past, those people tended to be our parents and church leaders and people, religious leaders and people in schools, in their community. But today, it's a handful of conglomerates who are giving us the stories that are controlling our lives. There's something else George Gerbner talks about, too. He talks about something called the mean world syndrome. The more we're exposed to images on television of violence, of wrongdoing, of corruption, the more we tend to believe that the world is, in fact, a fearful, violent, unforgiving place. Gerbner says fearful people are more dependent, more easily manipulated, more susceptible to deceptively simple, strong, tough measures and hard-line postures. But what if we flip this on its head? Suppose that we had media that instead of just focusing on what people are doing wrong, where we're at our most deplorable, suppose that instead the media showed what people are doing that draws on the full range of human experience, our creativity, our leadership, our connectedness to each other. What would that do? Because we're at an extraordinarily important time in human history. We're at a tipping point. And we need stories that talk about the wildfires, that talk about the storms and the droughts and the floods that are associated with climate change. And we need to understand the science that links those together. But we also need to know about the people who are creating the alternatives, the solutions, the renewable energy, the smart technology that they're putting in place even in the most unexpected places, like in Tibet. And we need to know that there are other people on board, that we aren't the only ones who care about the climate and are ready to step up and take action. We need to know about the people who are dividing us, but too much exposure to this will give us the mean world syndrome. We also need to know about the people who are bringing us together and showing us how to move forward as a community. We need to know how buying too much stuff can undermine our own well-being and that of the planet. But we also need to know about the people who are developing the movement to shrink our ecological footprint and building more satisfying ways of life as a result, because we don't, in fact, have to trash the planet to be happy. This was a critical missing piece for me. The stories of what people are doing, not only when they're at their worst, but when they're at their best. And these were the kinds of stories that I didn't actually find until I went out myself to find the kinds of stories and the people that we feature in Yes Magazine. People like Ben Gottschall, a Nevada cowboy, who's working to preserve the precious Oglala aquifer and prevent the KXL tar sands pipeline from running across it. People like Lily Ye, who's organizing in communities around the country, bringing out the artistry and the talent and the creativity in those communities and bringing that into the forefront. People who are doing the tough inner work of finding peace, even in the most challenging circumstances. These are folks that are stepping up to provide leadership at one of the most troubling times in our planet's history, at a time when the repercussions of the things that we do now could affect generations for millennia to come. And they're coming up with solutions that are out of the box, solutions that are radical enough, not just tweaking around the edges, but radical enough for the needs of our times and up to the scale of the challenge that we're facing. There are people who realize that we are the ones we've been waiting for. It's only we that can and frankly must make history. These kinds of stories are what I include in the idea of solutions journalism or appreciative journalism. It's about asking these questions: what's possible now? What matters most? And what's working? So let me give you an example from a recent issue of Yes Magazine. Last spring, 2011, we decided to do an issue on jobs and livelihood. And if you remember at the time, all the political discussion was about deficits and debt ceilings. The folks that were actually out there struggling, the millions of people who are unemployed or underemployed, the people who are losing their homes, losing the grasp on a middle-class way of life, those people were largely invisible at that time. This was before the Occupy movement kicked in. But we knew they were out there. They were not being covered by the news media, but of course we knew that they were out there. And we wanted to know what can work for those folks. What can they do to create jobs? Because clearly the answers weren't coming either from big government or from big corporations. And growth is not the answer. The benefits of economic growth have been going to the top 1%. They've not been trickling down. They've not been creating jobs. So we needed to step outside the normal political dialogue because the Democrats and Republicans alike are talking about growth, and that's not going to do it. So we began to look for what would do it. And here's a story we found. In Cleveland, Ohio, a Rust Belt city, worker-owned cooperatives that are supplying fresh fruits and vegetables, solar-powered electricity, and laundry services to some of the anchor institutions, the hospitals and the universities in Cleveland. And they're paying living wages and getting an ownership stake in these worker-owned cooperatives, which means that these people can then spend money into their communities and help generate further economic activity and further business growth. So we asked, who's leading? Well, all over the country, people are forming businesses together, but they're not only forming businesses together, they're also developing the local infrastructure to support other businesses so other people have those opportunities. Jobs and livelihood are not intrinsically linked. There's other ways to get a livelihood besides selling your time to an employer. Because a lot of what we need, we can get by doing ourselves, or we can get by exchanging with our neighbors, or we can get by just having less. So we looked at what does it mean when we work less, we share the work around, more people can have jobs, we can shrink our ecological footprint, and best of all, we can get back some of what's the most precious thing we have, which is our time. And what would happen if this change took place, if we go beyond the examples here and there across the country and look at what it would mean if it became more pervasive? So we interviewed Van Jones, who's working on bringing that question into the national conversation, talking about how we can get good green jobs all over the country so that we can stabilize the planet and so that we can leave to our children the opportunities to thrive that our ancestors worked so hard to leave to us. Put it together, and what you find is that we have the answers. We, the people, have the answers, no matter how tough the challenge is, whether it's joblessness, whether it's climate crisis, whether it's hunger. We, the people, have the answers. And really, the good things that happen in our society are when we, the people, take control. So now when I get depressed about the bad news, I think about Will Allen, son of sharecroppers, who's growing fish year-round in greenhouses in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and using the fish waste to fertilize vegetables that are also being made available to those communities in Milwaukee. And this approach to hunger gives me hope. And I think about all the young people who have yet to make their mark and how important it is to them to have role models. Because there's a reason that the word encourage has the word courage in it. It takes courage to step out and believe that another world is possible and then make it a reality. But it's those stories of courage that encourage us to take action. And it's our action that embodies the hope of our world. So here's what I'd like to ask you. I'd like to ask you for 1 month to include one piece of appreciative journalism, solutions journalism, in your media diet every day. And then share that story with your friends. Each of us today is a media distribution hub. So use that hub of yours for 1 month to interrupt your friend's sense of powerlessness. And at the end of the month, ask yourself if you're feeling a little bit less of the effect of the mean world syndrome. And ask yourself if you're seeing new opportunities to make the world more just and sustainable. Because the stories we pay attention to are what forms our idea of what's possible, what choices we have. And it's the choices that we have that will make history. Thank you very much.